Look at these good-looking three dudes. The Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show, and it's playoff time. We're going to talk about why you made or missed the playoffs. A lot of great research out this week as it's week 15 of the NFL season, and that means it is go time. So what to do, everyone? I'm JJ Buck. We got Steven Masterson, Aaron Hernandez with you as always, and it's about the fantasy football playoff season. So it's exciting. We have 2 7-7 teams. Our fearless defending champion, Mr. Aaron Hernandez, just missed the playoffs. And with that, now that we have that data, we have a season with what we did. It worked or didn't work until this point. I wanna look back, right? And emotions aside. And how do you feel about your draft? And I'll start with you, Aaron, just going back to draft day, how it played out. Your strategy, you're the, hey, get off my lawn. I want experience. I want guys that have been there, done that drafter. And you're in the mix. And it was wild. I think there was, 5 of us that were like 7-7 in
Yeah.
this league. Looking back at it, how do you feel about your strategy and your season?
So looking back, it's like the strategy I took taking vets. It's like it took a while for that to really get together, especially since a few of them got traded. There were some swings and misses. Specifically ETN. I probably should have drafted Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry at the pick, but it's like towards that end of the season, I think the last 6 weeks was where I felt happy with that team. And, this last week, I went down swinging. I just happened to go against someone that had a even better week. So it's like, I think if I would have won, I would have been 5-1 in the last 6 weeks. So it's like really the beginning of the season, getting it together, getting consistency, kind of trying to overcome the dips from those trades, from Devontae Adams getting situated on the Jets, seeing if, Amari Cooper is ever going to come around. And it's like I had enough depth, but it wasn't consistent. So it was the reason why I didn't make the playoffs. I just didn't score enough in the first half of the season.
Yeah, the wide receivers you went, it was no one where it wasn't necessarily just injury. It's the dudes got traded, and Cooper never really caught on, and then he was hurt a little bit, and Devontae Adams was definitely a roller coaster ride. And the Jets, you crushed it, man, with your running backs, even missing on Travis Etienne, you David Montgomery, Kyron Williams, and Chase Brown. And Chase Brown was part of that second half push for you. So you absolutely crushed it on running backs, but it just shows you, how volatile football is, because you probably have the best running back group in our league. But when you're looking at it, and I think overall, man, it's when you have the right guys. Debo Samuel, but kind of seeing the 49ers really be all
Yeah.
over the place. And he's
Yeah.
been complaining the last couple weeks.
That
But
one was a
I think,
difficult one.
yeah, I think strategy wise though, um, in terms of your team makeup, the way that you hit it, if just one of your wide receivers is more of a consistent, like, weekly 15, you know, 17-point guy, I think you're in a pretty good position.
Yeah, I think I would have been, especially too after Devontae got traded. It's like Jacoby Myers was a PPR, consistent dude. So it's like that was there. But like you said, it's like I was one guy away just on a little bit more points. So it was close. I think too had Kyler Murray, his ups and downs were very difficult to kind of navigate. And it's like I picked up Purdy, tried to play him, but never played him, and it's just like I couldn't find the right, you know, makeup to come up
Yeah.
to make the playoffs. So
Well, Steve, you were one of the 7-7 teams in our league, 10-team PPR league, standard roster configuration that we're all used to. Um, and you're looking at how it played out for you. You have a chance to get hot at the right time because you have some nuclear players on your roster. But what's fascinating too about this conversation is you had the number 2 overall pick and you were a CMC drafter. and we'll talk about my draft because I had number one overall. I passed on Justin Jefferson, but you did make some moves in the season. You were a bit of a waiver wire darling over the last couple weeks, but you crushed it on Saquon Barkley, and that helped you get by now that Puka is healthy. When you look at your team and your strategy, how are you feeling about how the season played out?
Draft strategy wise, I only have 4 players I drafted still starting on my team. So you're 100% right. Like I played the waiver wire, which means that I missed more than I hit, right? Like missed on my first overall pick being CMC. Um, Honestly, Jalen Waddle while Tua was out, that was kind of a miss. He's back in the lineup, but uh, really my big hits were Puka, Josh Allen, Saquon Barkley. Other than that, I missed more than I hit on anybody. I don't really have anybody left on my roster. Last week I started Adam Thielen and Jaden Reed, who ended up with 0, and
It
just
didn't matter.
got
I
lucky that
know.
Puka and Josh Allen went off for 90 points. But so from a drafts perspective, it's always easier to look back. If I would have known Saquon Barkley was going to be there in the second round, I wouldn't have taken CMC. I would have been a lot more comfortable taking, and I would still do this. I mean, knowing Jamar Chase is who he is, I would love to said I would have taken him, but I would have taken Amon Ra. I was a big Amon Ra guy coming in, and then I would have taken Saquon, and in the third round, maybe I go Jalen Waddle, or I completely change my draft strategy, and it changes how everything turns out. That being said, obviously you can always make a run by picking people off of waivers and you know, make good runs. So Aaron ended up with more people on his roster that he drafted. I just got lucky and hit on players a week earlier than their big boom weeks. So
Yeah, and that's something we're going to talk about too. Is while it hasn't necessarily been a waiver wire year, the late additions are going to be impactful in the playoffs. Like there wasn't that like last year, it was like kind of Rasheed Rice, Puka, guy, Kieran Williams. Like early on, you saw like, oh, these are going to be players this season. We haven't necessarily had that guy. There's been a couple of the injury fill-ins, but last couple weeks, Thielen is absolutely locked in PPR with the way Bryce Young is playing right now. Jonnu Smith, is your tight end. That game goes overtime, and all of a sudden he has 3 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown in overtime. But the Dolphins are throwing to the tight end now.
yeah,
In
yeah.
overtime.
I mean, and Darnell Mooney was a player we talked about early in the show or early in the season, and I didn't start him, but he's still doing great. And
Yeah, I liked Mooney
for
a lot.
for me, it's losing the thing I hate the most about my draft is, yeah, I took CMC and I took Jordan Mason to back him up. Obviously, that didn't work out. I used all my FAAB throughout the year, so I wasn't able to get Guerrero. I can't say his name. Guerrero. Maybe I'm saying it right there. Um, so my running back, I'm starting Saquon, and then I picked up every handcuff I could possibly pick up, and I'm hoping I get 10 points out of them. So the strength of my team has become the weakness after the draft. I didn't draft enough backup talent. So that's kind of the only thing I regret. That's the thing I regret the most about my draft.
So I was the number one overall pick in our league. I didn't want to be number one overall, but had to deal with it, and I did go Justin Jefferson over Christian McCaffrey. I've been burned in the past. I've been off a year on running backs usually early, so I went with Justin Jefferson. And I was super wide receiver heavy. You know me with my wide receivers. Justin Jefferson, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, Malik Neighbors. Not always playing those guys at the right time throughout the season, and I did draft Derrick Henry in the second round. Immediately traded Derrick Henry for Brock Bowers. And I think what salvaged it for me was the second trade I made. So getting Brock Bowers was nice, but I had Jake Ferguson on my roster. I was able to move him for Josh Jacobs, and that I think gave me an opportunity. So looking back on it, the one thing I would have done is because I played J.K. Dobbins a lot. I had him. I had Brian Robinson. Um, would be maybe instead of that extra wide receiver, because I took Neighbors and Worthy there. Go for a top 10 option at quarterback. Like this is the one thing I feel uncomfortable with. I've been playing quarterback roulette throughout the entire season. I drafted Dak Prescott. Of course, he got hurt, and then you're playing a waiver wire game. And if you didn't hit on a Baker Mayfield early, you're left with a Geno Smith, or Matt Stafford didn't come on until late. I've been playing Bo Nix a lot. Like my playoff hopes hinge on Bo Nix this week. And so looking back at my draft, one thing I would say is I'd like to have had a more sturdy option at the quarterback position. So, but it's easy to do that now, and that's the way we can do it, is looking back at that draft strategy. And with that being said, you mentioned it, Steve, and I do want to touch on FAAB. Now, if you're playing in a league that has a free agent acquisition budget, if you don't have any now, how are you feeling? I've been on 0 FAAB for I think 3 or 4 weeks now. Like I used it all up there at the end. I think it was like Cedric Tillman was one of the last ones I got. But with that being said, we've had the discussions on both sides of you don't want to end the season with FAAB, because what's the point about that? But I'm gonna start with you, Steve, because you're just talking about picking up a bunch of handcuffs. Do you feel like you should have held some back? How do you feel about the way you used it this year?
If my team was in a better place, I would have loved to have been able to save some. But because I was down CMC and Puka so early in the season, I knew I was fighting for one of those last playoff spots. My team wasn't coming together. I started the season, I think, 2-4. And that's kind of when I went ham with my FAAB. I spent most of it on Kareem Hunt. And if we're being honest, getting Kareem Hunt saved me in the long run, because without CMC, Jordan Mason was not performing. At that point, Jalen Waddle was down. I didn't have Puka. I needed that flex spot, right? So I was piecing together my wide receivers and hoping that I could get points out of Mason and Kareem Hunt. And Kareem Hunt won me probably 2 weeks just because I had him on my team. So yeah, it stinks to not have any FAAB. And of course, if I was, one of the 10-4 teams, because in some of my other leagues, I was in first place, so I saved it. I was like, there's no reason to spend a ton, and I was able to get, Grendo and a few others. But for this league, I'm more okay with being YOLO, because in that situation, Kareem Hunt did save me season. Yeah, and
at that point, you needed the saver then, as opposed to being able to pick up someone right now, because if you didn't do it then, you wouldn't be playing in the playoffs. Probably.
Well, I mean, and honestly, it comes down to the game against Aaron. I lost to Aaron by a tackle from
that's hilarious.
Devontae Adams. Yes, which I wanted to send you the meme back to you last week after the whole thing shook out, but decided.
Oh, I was waiting. That would have been fun. Like, but, when you said that, I was like, nah, I'm already cooked, bro. It's like it's not happening.
But that was the week that made me go 2-4, and I lost to Aaron by 0.06 points. And it put me into this like 8th seed. And I was like, if I don't make a big move, Isaiah Pacheco goes down. I knew, okay, I got to get Kareem Hunt. Like I knew 7-7 was the goal, because in our league, 7-7 teams are always the teams that make the playoffs. Now this year was unique in the fact that 5 teams ended at 7-7. So it came down to points. But Kareem Hunt was that player. I was like, I'm not going to miss out on him. And yeah, I overspent, because I think I spent 45. I think the next closest person was 20, but he saved my season. So I have a chance, because I'm in the playoffs now, where I'm not having to worry about last place punishments. And even if I don't make it far, at least I don't have to buy pizza and wear a tacky shirt.
The easiest last place punishments in the world in our league. But Aaron, you've managed it well. You still have $15 up. I know you're in the other bracket, but like you said, we still are playing, because that will determine last place. How do you feel about the waiver this year and how you used your budget with your team?
This year I tried to use it as wisely as possible, because I was kind of in the situation that Steve was in. It's like it was a little bit of turmoil, through that first half, and it's like I wanted to save some for the end of the season here. It's like kind of now it's like Garendo. It's like I ended up, going against the team that had him with what I had on FAAB, but it wasn't enough. I already knew it. It's like I'm not going to get him on waivers. So it's like I tried to save a little bit for the end of the season, but it didn't pan out. I would say honestly, I probably ended up using more FAAB on quarterbacks, kind of picking up one or something like that. Because looking at Garendo there on waivers, it's like I have 3 running backs. It's like how we're starting to have one in flex already, and that's what I've been rolling with. It's like I didn't expect to end up having to go against the team, but I picked him up. But when I look at how much FAAB that was left over for those, I think Jacob had a ton.
Yeah.
So it's like I couldn't take him off waivers to kind of block someone from having him. So it's like that's something that just
Yeah, it's
shook
also
down the way it shook down. So
part of the strategy too. At
I
this
already
point
know I was like, I'm not getting him. So
in the season, I think another thing too, not just whether you have FAAB or not, is in the playoffs. Are you rostering an extra dude at certain positions? Are you kind of cutting some of that fat of guys you might not play to roster an extra quarterback if you don't have one of the top guys, or maybe just try to get the handcuff before someone else. So all the little games you're playing, and with this year the way the waiver wire played out, like I'm fine with what I did. Ending the last couple of weeks with $0 because I ended up getting Tyrone Tracy off one of those bids towards the end, and he's been someone I've started more times than not in a lineup, and it's kind of the same thing, just here or there using a couple bucks to just make sure I get that quarterback you want. But I think the strategy comes down to where you're at. If you have to be aggressive in attack, then spend it. And if you can save it, you save it. So it's how your team starts the season is what's going to be your determining factor and how you manage that. But I think this year, what was really
real quick, Jay, I just want to point out too, I think the other thing that's important to remember is every season is unique, right? But more often than not, Garendos don't show up at the end of a playoff push, right? That he's the third string running back. Most of the time on the third string running back, you're going to spend $55 on. They're not going to do 31 points. That's unique. So I there's a ton of statistics that suggest the first 4 weeks are where you're going to find your studs. This is a unique season where we didn't have that. All of the studs we kind of got were injury related, but that doesn't mean in the future you shouldn't be still trying to get some of those guys early, right? The Pukas, the Kyrans, those guys will come up, and so this season is unique. You should save some FAAB if you can, but there's people in our league who still have $8,500. That's not, you're not gonna win the most of those teams are not in the playoffs either. Like the teams that are in the playoffs have very little FAAB left. So there's this like balance you have to find, and you do need to know your team, but don't worry about saving it, hoping that big guy shows up. If you think somebody's good, just put the money in.
because that's going to change your season. Even if, like you said, the Kareem Hunt edition for you got you to a certain point, you used him as an asset, to make another move a couple weeks ago, and there you go. And I think that's a good point. Is I'd rather be aggressive early than be sitting on something with nothing to show for it. Because even if it's not a season changer, it still could be one of those guys on a hot streak, that gets you 2 or 3 weeks where you win.
And we always talk about winning a week. Like if Aaron wins one more week, he's in the playoffs and I'm out, right? If it's 1 week, that's all it takes. So sometimes that's an important aspect of if I would have just won that one game. I was thinking about it. Before Aaron got eliminated, at one point I was like, man, if Devontae Adams doesn't get that tackle and I beat Aaron, I'm in the playoffs and he's out. There's so many like little, you know what I mean? Like it's so many little things. So it's important to just.
Well, it's like you look at the last 3 games of my season, it's like I had the top team. So I had Mike and Joe, and then I had Rob, and then I had that amazing week against, Jacob's amazing week, I guess I should say. So it's like it's coming close with Rob. It's like, I beat Mike and Joe. They were down that week. I can't remember if it was buys or injuries, but I was looking at the end of my season and I was like, all right, so I got two great teams and one that's going to be a contender. So it's like it's
Yeah,
like I feel like I was like a week away. If it was one more week, I probably would feel fine because I was happy enough with my roster, even doing what I've done on waivers and just dice rolls. So
Yep.
And that's another topic we're gonna hit too is boom. Winning week. Say you want a team that has some consistency and brings you a floor, but it's about winning weeks. It's all you got to focus on. Win the week, and then you're on to the next one. And speaking about the playoff rundown, who are the most rostered players on playoff rosters? This is one of my favorite articles that comes out at this time of year for just to think back on draft strategy and to look at what players are doing what. And this is ESPN article from Tristan Cockcroft, and I love it because you get a sense of how things play out. And this really highlights how open this year was. Like there wasn't a direct strategy like this. Oh, you had to hit wide receivers early, or you had to hit running backs early. This was a year where you could crush it in different levels of the draft, and that's going to be evident too when you break down the top teams in our league, which is probably very similar to the top teams in your league. But the top 5 players on a playoff roster is no surprise. It's Mr. Boom himself, the guy that we're going to be chasing. It's Jamar Chase, who went 8th overall in drafts. So Jamar Chase was the number 1 player on rosters, wide receiver. Then you have Saquon Barkley, running back. Then you have Lamar Jackson, quarterback. Derrick Henry, running back. And number 5, Alvin Kamara. So you have 3 running backs, 1 quarterback, and a wide receiver, the top 5 players on the most playoff rosters on the ESPN platform. And that's pretty much going to be the same across the board. And this goes really against the grain, right, guys, with what we were talking about going into the season. I know, Steve, you started to lean back the other way because you're like, there's too many people zigging this way. We need to zag back this way. In PPR, it still became the year of the running back.
Well, I think context is important. Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley were both first-round picks, but they've been huge boom guys.
But they were late picks.
Right. They were 100% late, but more what I'm saying is they were huge boom guys. Where the other 3 guys on this list were second, third, and later, right? And have just been consistent. So like the team with Alvin Kamara has a really solid roster around as well, and he's been the best RB2 you could have drafted. You're probably stoked with him. But Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley, and honestly, Derrick Henry, those were 3 players that Jamar Chase, before the season, before the injury and the contract stuff, he was rated as the number 2 wide receiver. And then just the injuries, the contract talks, he got pushed out. Yep.
mm-hmm.
But we were clearly right at the beginning. Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry were those 2 players that when we were talking about it, they were going in the late 3rd or 4th round. So they moved up, but probably not enough. Just from a draft perspective, though, it's really about hitting on those players.
Yeah, but
later.
It's still 5 of the top 10 are running backs.
Oh, for sure.
And was such a wide receiver narrative. And I think what stands out is it's where you get them, because your point's right. And when we talk about the roster construction, but it's not 5 mid-round wide receivers, it's 5 running backs in the top 10. And the only wide receivers in the top 10 on the most playoff rosters. So you have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. That's wild to me in the PPR world we live in.
You got to look at number 6 too on that list, JJ.
Yeah.
It's not a wide receiver. It's not a running back. So it's like Brock Bowers is on there, and no one saw that. So
this year was you're chasing Travis Kelce, even at a reduced price for a lot of people. They're still maybe getting him at the second round. Sam Laporta, what he did last year, and Brock Bowers just slid into that role. I was like, oh, I'm just going to do what Sam Laporta did last season.
I think pass catchers are, if we look at a lot of the first round receivers, it was Tyreek Hill, he's got hot late, but he did not have a good season for his standards, especially where we drafted him. Amon-Ra, He's having a good season. He scored a touchdown in every game, but he's not putting up the same yards and catches that we've become accustomed. He's not performing at a first-round talent. And CeeDee Lamb, I mean, with Dak going down, he just hasn't looked the same. So it's probably more that than anything, right? Justin Jefferson has been a great pick. We know he's great. He's quarterback proof. We had talked about it all offseason. And Jamar Chase, I mean, you gave the stat last time we talked about it. He's got 3 of the only 50-point games or 5 50-point games in the fantasy season. So Jamar Chase is just that guy.
So since week 3 of the season, Jamar Chase has 297.7 points. And that is that's almost 100 points more than any other wide receiver.
That's insane.
So he's been awesome. But I think even in PPR where we fall in love with the numbers, and it's just a reminder that, those guaranteed touches, there's still something about that. And we've seen a few more workhorse running backs this season because the other running backs in the top 10, Joe Mixon has been phenomenal in Houston. He's been a true workhorse. Devon Achane. And the thing, you brought up a good point, Steve. With these wide receivers, like, you're always going to bet on talent, but a running back is more quarterback proof than a wide receiver. Like, your backup quarterback is still going to be easier to get your number one running back involved as opposed to your number one wide receiver.
Yeah. And Devon Achane did have a little dip when Tua was in, but overall he's been great. Saquon has been amazing. Derrick Henry, same thing. I mean, those guys have looked amazing, and there wasn't a lot of running backs taken the first round. Bijan looks good, but you would have taken Saquon over him. CMC wouldn't have been drafted in the first round, if at all, if we would have known what was going to happen to him. So,
and those are good points too, because I do want to point this out. The first half or second half, like, if you drafted like 5 or later, you probably crushed your draft, because that's where you got your Jamar Chase or your Barkley or your potentially your Derrick Henry at that point in time. Because Bijan Robinson, it was ADP 3.7. He's down on just 53% of playoff rosters. Breece Hall was another one of those dudes, and you're scanning down the list, and it's like, Breece Hall is not on a lot of those teams. And it was like the second half of the draft is just where it was at.
Unless you took Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, which we did have happen.
We did see that happen. Garrett Wilson he was on at 50%. So he was manageable throughout the season. Maybe not, of course, the highs you were expecting, potentially talking about him as a top 5 guy overall.
He's one of those guys that he had that stretch where he wasn't doing well, and then he kind of came on strong. But I'm sure you missed a few big point games because you're like, I can't start him. They look terrible. And then he finally got hot. He's looking hot now, but.
And I think even Aaron Rodgers is finishing out the season. Like, he hasn't been great, but that's good enough. Like, that salvages Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, if he's on your roster. Heck, we've seen the running backs, Davis and Allen, at least have a chance to make some plays if those guys are on your roster down the stretch. But I did want to talk about, before we get into what the playoff rosters look like in terms of getting the bye, because we've talked about it, and it's something that I really try to focus on, and that's winning weeks. And that's because of the boom, right? Here comes the boom. Jamar Chase is that boom player. We saw last week, Josh Allen have one of those games. Puka Nacua, the Jerry Jeudy game on Monday Night Football, which destroyed a ton of people. Like, you can't. I guess Jamar Chase is a player you can draft for that. Like, the track record is there of this dude having multiple 40-point games. But I think more so than chasing a 40-point game, because you can't predict that, like 6 touchdowns from Josh Allen, is the week-to-week process of whether it's being aggressive on the waiver wire for a player. That's what it's about. And I don't know how to quantify it because you can't predict something like that. But I know my mindset went a little bit from making I wanted to have safe floor. I wanted safe players. Like, get me 10 points to where now I want a couple dudes that I know can score 30 points. and then I'll figure out the rest.
Yeah, and
No, go ahead,
no,
Aaron.
I was going to say that's something that I've thought about too. You know, looking not necessarily at waivers, but trying to see where I can find a trade that kind of makes sense to get a player like that. And it's like, you know, I looked at everyone's team. There is a few that it's like maybe in it, but I don't know if I could have gotten that trade to happen with my team and it worked out. So it's like I was in for the long run, hoping these players would finally go off. And it, I think Devonte Adams did it once for me, and that's really the only one in recent memory. So it's like that's one thing I think that was lacking on my team. Definitely for sure is just getting a more than one boom player, and it's something to have because I was like you, JJ. It's like I think it's easier to read consistency and have that there, have that like safe floor. You kind of know what you're going to get, but you still need that someone to take you over the top, because it's like it's gonna win you weeks, stuff like that. It's like I lost to a team that took George Pickens out because he was hurt and put in Jordan Addison. Addison scored 3 touchdowns, and I thought he was going to score more, to be honest. So it's like it's hard to predict, but it's like you want to be able to have those players that that are going to be able to do that. And Jamar Chase is right now the prime example of that, and maybe Puka now. I was talking to one of my owners in another league, and it's like he had drafted Puka at the beginning of the season and wasn't sure about him, and held out the whole entire season, had him, and then he finally went off at the right time for him to get in the playoffs, and it's just how things work out. But it's nice to have that.
Well, so I played against Jamar Chase on that Thursday night football game, and then I played against Jerry Jeudy on his 40-point game. Both games I was winning, and then, well, I would have won if we weren't talking about these massive games. So I've been on the other side of this. But the boom players with high floors and then have those Jamar Chase play type games, those are the reason we draft them in the first or second round, right? The reason I went CMC and then was okay with taking Saquon, I was like, those guys have huge boom potential and they have high floors. So those guys that we really want, those are probably first or second round picks. So my team is kind of the example of this, right? I have Saquon, I have Puka, I have Josh Allen. They all have potential to have boom weeks, but they also have really like high floors. But then I have a player like Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed might get me 30. He also could get 0, right? So those are sometimes like, yeah, you do want boom players, but you want the boom players who can, like, I would rather have Justin Jefferson all day, every day, because you're going to probably get 20. And he has the potential to get 30. Like Jordan Addison goes off and Justin Jefferson still ends up with, 30 points.
Oh, it's Sam Darnold throwing 5 touchdown passes.
Yeah, exactly.
Incredible.
But like those are the players you're looking for. The Jordan Addison, you're not wrong, Aaron. What if he starts Jordan Addison next week and then Jordan Addison gets 0? Because
It can happen.
that's the potential. So yeah, you want boom players, but you kind of want, for me at least how I'm starting to evaluate is I want those boom players, and I want to take them in the first, second round because I want to get the Jamar Chase, the Saquons, the CMCs, like the players who could blow up that have high floors. And then maybe I might take a boom quarterback, but other than that, I don't really want to take a bunch of chances on players late. I want to get the consistency with potential for players who I'm like, hey, this guy could have a good breakout season. Devon Achane going in the third, he's booming now. Yeah, that's how I look at it. That doesn't that's what I've changed my mindset. I want boom players. I'm not going to draft safe in the first or second round anymore. I'm going to draft those big potential guys, but then I am probably going to draft safe later. Except for when you get to like round 13, who cares?
Yeah, I think that's a solid strategy. You're right. There's a reason we're drafting these guys in the top 20 because they do have the highest floors than everyone else. But there are some dudes like Jamar Chase has 3 games with 40 plus points. Like that is something that if they figure out his contract, because this dude might sit down again and really want some more money from the Cincinnati Bengals, like that, this dude is in conversation for the number 1 overall pick next year. Like it's a game-changing fantasy season. Now, is it are we chasing what happened with CD Lamb after last year? Well, there's always that potential. Quarterbacks can get hurt, they can go down, but again, it's the highest floors possible are going to be there early in the draft.
By the way, though, and this just needs to be pointed out, there's one consistent player the last 3 seasons is the number 1 overall pick. It's Justin Jefferson. Because is it Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp? Is it Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill? Now it's going to be, is it Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase? It's always Justin Jefferson. And I don't care about, like, Jamar Chase 100% should end up being the second wide receiver taken. But there's a reason you take Justin Jefferson, because he's always in the running and he's quarterback proof. It does not matter who plays the quarterback for him. I don't think Joe Burrow will always get hurt, but Jamar Chase is a little bit more quarterback dependent.
Clip it. There's the clip right there. Always Justin Jefferson. With that, we've talked about it. We've looked back. We've seen it. Now let's go to the proof that is the pudding of the playoffs. And again, we're using our league, our 10-team league, PPR league for this, but it hits on why the teams got the first round bye. And I'm always craving that. I'd love that at least moment to sit back in the playoffs. Don't have it. Didn't get a first round bye. But the teams that did, Steve, they hit what you talked about. And that was, crushing multiple parts of the draft. And with this being not necessarily a waiver wire season, like the teams that hit in the different levels of the draft, you're good. Not breaking any news there, right? That's not a hot take. So we had 2 10-4 teams in our league, one team that went 9-5, and then 5 of us went 7-7. So it was a really tight season for us. But if you look at the number 1 overall seed in our league, had the most points, hit it out of the park, Jaden Daniels late. Like, I know we discussed this early in the season of Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, get one of those guys and get a veteran. Well, it turns out that Jaden Daniels was the guy for the entire season. He's QB6 right now going into week 15. And that's just because he didn't play last week, but he's top 5 quarterback this season. He's a guy that you got in the 10th round or later this year. They hit on Joe Mixon, talked about him, who's been one of the best mid-round running backs. He's RB10 right now, and Joe Mixon has an 8th both playoff rosters this season. The Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet combo has been fantastic for them. And their first-round pick was Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's good. He's still wide receiver 3 this year, and they killed it with George Kittle. And that is finding someone at every level of the draft.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, Aaron. They had, when we walked away, we all said the same thing. We looked at their draft and went, wow, they did a great job, because they also kept Jonathan Taylor. And so you went, okay, Jonathan Taylor and their 3 wide receivers, because I think they have Cooper Kupp too. And they were the team that ended up taking Marvin Harrison Jr. And you can whiff on your second round pick when you hit in so many other places. Like, their team is solid. We all thought that when we walked away, and we were right. So.
Oh, no, I was so mad. I took Anthony Richardson. I can't even remember what round, but it was maybe 10th. I don't know where they picked Jaden Daniels, but they ended up taking him after. And it's like I was between those 2 quarterbacks, and I should have went Jaden Daniels. I did it in another league, and it's like I kicking myself for that, because I was totally into that pick. And their roster, it's like seeing the Cardinals, they have a little bit of inconsistency there, but it's like Steve said, it's like they just hit on so many things, so that's why they're the top team.
Yeah, and then the other team that was also 10-4 but just came behind him in points was Rob, brand new to our league, but he had CeeDee Lamb as a keeper. He got Jamar Chase in the first round. Enough said there. But what he did paid off. Like, the dude had drafted 2 tight ends. He drafted Trey McBride, which is someone we liked as a top 5 tight end going into the season. He took a chance on Brock Bowers. And what was he able to do? He was able to trade Brock Bowers to me and get Derrick Henry, who is still the king, and he's RB2. So all of a sudden you have Jamar Chase and Derrick Henry there, keeping CeeDee Lamb, who still has had nice moments even without Dak Prescott in a PPR league. And it's those boom players, right? And he took advantage of something that you don't see a lot, drafting multiple tight ends, and he turned it into a great running back. Now, what Brock Bowers has done, I'm less cranky over the last month and a half of the season, but that's also part of it, right? As even if you have the assets, use it, you get players and get better, and he did a great job with that.
He did, yeah.
Definitely savvy.
Well, and again, he hit so big because his keeper is amazing, and the fact that he hit on Jamar Chase, and he has Derrick Henry. Even if he didn't, his team was still solid. You hit on those big players, the Jamar Chases, and then you get solid production from CeeDee Lamb. You look great, so you can't complain about his team.
And he was someone that was playing quarterback roulette. He went C.J. Stroud. I know he started Jared Goff this season, and so there's multiple ways to hit it. You can find one of those super quarterbacks, and then you can get these super players. But man, that first round bye, 1 year, I want to get that first round bye. Just not.
It's nice. I've had it a few times, and it is so nice.
Just not be stressing going in to the fantasy football playoffs. But I wanted to have that little rundown looking back now that we're here and we have all the data and the research the year it played out. So going into the playoffs, and Aaron, you can still talk about this, I'm sure, in other leagues. You're in the postseason. What are you doing with your roster right now? Are you maybe rostering an extra quarterback or two, just looking ahead? Are you taking an extra running back or two? Like, what positions are you maybe stocking up on if you are able to win in advance? How do you guys strategize your playoff roster?
Typically, going into the playoffs, I'm looking at quarterbacks. I'm looking at their schedules. I'm looking at tight ends because tight ends kind of are one you can stream. Look at their schedules too. That's definitely one thing that I guess the two things that I'm usually looking at. I usually do stock up on quarterbacks. You saw it in our league. It's like I had too many quarterbacks, but it's like I need to get ready for that when it eventually comes or doesn't. So that is something because the playoffs, depending on if you have a bye or not, that's you want to be able to have one options. And for me, it's like I don't like to play waivers as much because it's too not in the playoffs. I like to be prepared going in. So usually I'm looking ahead of time to get my roster set up to where I'm comfortable.
What are you doing, Steve?
So I look at the weakest part of my team and then try to load up on that position. So for me, like right now, it's running backs. So I'm pretty sure I have 4 running backs on my bench. And I have no clue if any of them will hit, but it's Sean Tucker's and Jerome Ford's, all those guys that you're like, hey, maybe one of these guys hits, and I look super savvy, and maybe they don't. And it's no big deal. And then for the leagues where I do have first round buys, the one thing I actually always do if I have a first round buy is I sit my whole team. And the reason I do that is so that if somebody during my games gets hurt, I can drop them, like if it's a serious injury, and I can pick somebody up off of waivers. Yahoo doesn't let you drop people in your starting lineup, but if the whole team's on the bench, it doesn't matter. So just a little
But it's a good
tip
pointer for everyone.
Yeah, like, hey, if you got a first or second round bye, bench your whole team, and then if somebody on your bench who would have been on your bench gets hurt, go pick up somebody else, especially if it looks serious. So, or a player you don't really care about.
Yeah,
that's a good one. That's a sneaky one there. And I also say too, be prepared because it's fantasy playoffs and things are going to get crazy because we got Christmas, y'all, and there's 2 NFL games on Christmas. We got games on Saturday, so we got Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday. Like, just be ready. Like, life's going to happen. You're going to get crunk at that Christmas party. I get it. You're going to be playing Santa. You're going to have your kids going nuts. There's fantasy football implications on the line on Christmas. So just be ready. Before you start, tossing back all those whiskeys on Christmas Eve before you wake up with this mimosas, set your lineup. Set your fantasy lineup.
JJ, how many teams did you end up with this year? Just the one?
How many fantasy football teams?
Yeah.
I have 2.
Okay. So where did you end in both leagues? Position-wise.
So in our league, I was 4th, but it was just always,
Points count?
Just
they do.
one of the 7-7 teams that just got points. And in the our other league, what did I finish in? 6th.
You made the playoffs.
Made the playoffs.
Okay, Aaron, how'd you do?
One league is 10-3. Our league, 7-7, 8th place. The Wild, and then my other money league, the big 12-man league, it's like terrible. I mean, second pick next year, so to not find consistency.
Cannot find.
You're firing the
So-
coach, looking for a new general manager.
Right.
Everything, every single player that I had literally was probably the most inconsistent pick you could possibly make. That's how I describe this team.
So I did 8 leagues total this year, right? I finished 6th in our league. I finished 2nd in another league I do with a bunch of friends that we've been doing for a while. I finished 1st in 2 other leagues, and then in 3 leagues I finished 5th, 6th, and then I didn't make the playoffs. And then in our dynasty league, I had the second most points scored and finished 7th.
My dynasty league team's terrible right now.
I literally scored 211 points in our dynasty league, and I just happened to play the guy who had Josh Allen and Jamar Chase. And I was like, if I win, I'm in. And I had, I thought I scored 211 points before the second games, and I was like, I'm in. And then his team went off for 230, and I was like, I can't believe this just happened to me. So,
living the dream.
Sometimes that's why we love to hate fantasy, right?
That's why we love to hate fantasy. But it is here. Hopefully, you got into the playoffs in one of the 78 leagues that you're in, and you can enjoy it and have some fun. And one of the things that this year showed me, and we'll break it down. We'll have our preseason mocks. We'll talk about dynasties. So that ultimately, when it's all said and done, just draft the team you want, because there's never going to be an exact set strategy that makes sense. If you go all in one way or the other, just draft who you want. It's fantasy football, for goodness sakes. I know it means a lot. It's what we do, sit here for hours and talk about it. But when it's all said and done, draft who you want on your team.
And yeah, being able to root for your own team sometimes is okay too. We always say not to do it.
Kind of cool that Bo Nix is my fantasy quarterback, and it's actually working.
You get to watch the Broncos game, but the other part of that is, like, when I watch a Dolphins game, sometimes I hate my life because they're losing and Jalen Waddle's doing nothing. I'm just like, this is the worst.
Yep, it's Jacksonville, and then they go decide to win and give up the first pick again.
That Jacksonville game, man, that was something else.
That was
like,
ugly.
I'm gonna play Will Levis this week, and this were 6 points. And Mac Jones beats him. I'm like, what? Get out of here.
If it makes you feel any better, could you have started anybody else?
No, I would have still lost, but I would have rather made a better decision, because it still comes down to points. Like, that could have kept me out of the playoffs as starting a quarterback that scored 5 points in a week, as opposed to one that gets you 17 points.
I looked at I was doing the math, and I said, okay, you had such a big lead. I was like, JJ, you can afford to lose. Bench your team so I can make the playoffs, you jerk.
Never. All the points every single week. It matters.
I'm not going to lie. The first half of the games when you were texting us, I wanted to just be like, JJ, I'm not the intended audience. Just text Aaron. I'm not happy right now. And then Puka and Josh Allen went off.
You know how much it's. So Thursday Night Football. Steve over here, Jaden Reed, 0 points. Josh Jacob, 24 points. I'm like, oh.
I had already thought I lost. I was like, it's over.
Yep.
This is nice. I'm going into the weekend, have a nice lead. The dude smacked me by 40 points still. And he had a player score 0 points.
I did have a player score. And I started Nick Chubb, who got 5.
Yeah.
That's fantasy. talk about
That's the good end versus the bad end of fantasy.
I just got lucky. Like, honestly, it was 90 points from 2 players. It's
in that same game. I was like,
Yeah.
can you stop? Someone
Well,
play freaking defense.
when that game started,
And
before
you
that
know
game
the worst
started,
thing about that? So I was on a bus coming up from Las Cruces, right?
Yeah.
The Aggies just swept the Lobos. The Aggies kicked the crap out of the Lobos this weekend. It was not a good weekend for the Lobos. So we just lost back-to-back games, women's basketball. Called it. I'm on the bus. I'm just sitting there watching my weekend get worse and worse. Getting beat by the Aggies twice, broadcasting those games. And then I'm just sitting there watching Josh Allen and Puka Nacua curb stomp me on a bus.
Well, so at one point you text and you're like, I should have started. And I was just sitting there going, JJ's up by 20 points. I have 2 players left to his 5. Like, it's over. My season is done. I had already gone. Like, honest to God, I was so mad at this. I went and started playing video games because I was like, I can't watch that game. I'm just going to be so mad the rest of the day. I have to get away from it. So I went away. And then Sarah, who's also trying to make the playoffs in another league, she has Josh Allen. She goes, hey, that's a Josh Allen touchdown. Hey, that's another Josh Allen touchdown. That's another Josh. I was like, she said that 3 times. And so I look at my phone and I was like, holy smokes, I might be able to beat JJ. And then it just kept happening. And I was like, then I had to play all the scenarios out because I was like, okay, I have more points than the 2. Like, I was in 8th. I was like, I had to go, okay, who has to lose? Aaron has to lose, or Terrence, or Aaron and Terrence, or Brandon. Like, I needed 2 of those 3 to lose. I was just like, am I going to make it? Is it going to happen? And then that was like fantasy football. I literally my whole weekend had been ruined, and then it was all saved by 2 players at the end of the season. So I understand, JJ. I feel for you. On the other side, I was super happy.
Well, and it's like I had 2 players on Monday night, and I was like, I'm already dead. I was like, I don't know. I don't want to watch this game.
Dude, I watched the Monday night game rooting so hard against Chase Brown. I've just never rooted so hard against a player. I was just like, no, don't score.
Like,
stop giving him the ball.
3 touchdowns, please.
Well, and you had your
make some tackles. Do something. Sack him. Do something.
I don't usually do that, right? When I watch fantasy football, I root for my players. I try not to root against any other players because you can't control what happens. I'm just going to root for my player to make a play. And because I had a chance, I was rooting. And then I had to take Ella to swim. And right as I took Ella to swim, I get a notification. Joe Burrow throws touchdown, Chase Brown. I was like, oh no, it's happening. So I was sitting,
jump in the pool.
I was sitting there watching Ella swim, like watching my phone. I probably look like the worst parent ever because I was just like, God, I don't know if I'm going to win this. Okay.
Yeah, you're like, you need 25 more points. I'm like, that's not coming. And you're like, you got what was it, 20?
You got 20
in the first half. I was like, it's wishful thinking.
It was not wishful thinking. It was hopeful that it wouldn't happen. Because
it didn't.
It didn't. Thank God. Because
like,
if you would have won, I wouldn't have made the playoffs.
That's all right. You still have something to play for, Aaron, which is not finishing in last place. So good luck with that. It's on the playoffs. Here we go. Gentlemen, good luck to everyone.
Yeah.
Whether you're in the playoffs, whether you're not playing for last place, so you don't have to stand on the side of the road holding a sign or do something terrible, or in our league, just show up and buy pizza. But there's a lot of bad things that could happen to you if you finish in last place. So
we need to do your idea, JJ, and do the Dion's thing. We got to go to Dion's, and you're going to have to eat a slice of pizza and take off an hour every slice you eat.
Yeah, just change the whole Waffle House thing for Dion's.
Yeah, because that's always been our thing. Yeah.
Can you eat 24 slices of pizza? So you don't have. Well, you can't do that. So maybe it'd be 12. We'll talk about this. The Dion's is open 24 hours like a Waffle House.
But they're open for 12 hours.
Maybe it'll force you to sit in the parking lot in vehicle in Albuquerque. We don't know what can happen, right? It's Albuquerque. Anything can happen. So you don't want to finish in last place.
You could do 12 hours and go, hey, you have to eat a large slice of pizza, not a small slice of pizza. And for every slice you eat, you could end up we could make it 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be an hour. You can make people miserable either way. Yeah. 24 slices get you out like right when you get there. or you just sit there and eat pizza and be miserable.
Sit in the corner. Absolutely. I'm down. It's time. We need to up it a little bit in our league. We need to put some more pressure on last place.
We need more misery.
A little more pressure on last place in our league. It's gonna happen. We're gonna push it through. Right? We don't need. It's just we just need 6 hands to go up.
We're gonna end up with so many people quitting the league.
That's fine.
The 4 people who say no are out.
Can't take the heat. Turn off the air fryer. That's what they always say. So check us out, please and thank you. I know it's been a minute, but life happens, and this is our side project, but we do enjoy it. We appreciate you hanging out with us. We'll get some more content out there, even if it's shorter stuff, with the holiday season, but just some fun stuff we'll get out there for you. And gentlemen, happy holidays too.
Happy holidays.
Oh yeah, happy holidays, everyone. We'll be seeing you guys all soon.
So may the fantasy gods be in your favor, everyone. Thank you.
Peace.
Later, y'all.